With COVID restrictions finally loosening, China's now bracing for a sharp rise in infections in the coming weeks. After almost 3 years of tough measures under the zero COVID strategy, many people are catching the virus for the very first time. TICKER's Adam Hancock reports now from Singapore.
China is likely about to face what most of the world suffered in the early stages of this pandemic. That is a huge wave of infections hitting a population for the very first time. For almost 3 years now, Beijing has tried to get zero COVID, but this week they've changed the rules about restrictions, and we now expect to see a huge surge of cases. Now, one of the big changes is around testing. There's going to be a lot less testing, and at first that might mean we see a lot less cases. But obviously people will now be carrying the virus without knowing it, as they're not going to be testing as much, and that will mean a lot more spread. Also, travel will now be a lot easier within China, so you'd expect to see the virus spreading across most of the country. One of the big changes is about people now being able to recover from COVID at home. Previously, they were taken off to quarantine centres, and authorities are already issuing advice about how to treat the virus at home and recover from it. But there's a lot of concern in China still. Many people are still very afraid of this virus. That's because for the last 3 years, they've been living under these restrictions. Many people don't know anyone who has caught COVID. So there's been a big rush on pharmacies with people buying medication for fever and also self-testing kits as well. Now, one of the big concerns about China opening up like this is whether or not hospitals will be able to cope. And we understand that some of the larger hospitals are putting aside areas purely for COVID patients. But will hospitals in more rural and remote regions where the facilities aren't as good, will they be able to cope with an expected surge of patients? And obviously vaccination rates in China, particularly amongst the elderly, are not as high as the government would like, so that will be of big concern. Many are also watching to see what happens to the death rate. Officially, just over 5,000 deaths have been reported in China so far. Some experts have warned that could rise above 1.5 million if the restrictions are loosened too fast. And if there are a lot of deaths and hospitalisations, will the government roll back on some of this easing? Reporting from Singapore, Adam Hancock for TICKER News.